Welcome. I'm Mimi Corcoran, the President and CEO of the National Center for Learning Disabilities. Thank you for being with us here today. We're very excited to be with all of you. The mission of NCLD is to improve the lives of the 1 in 5 with learning and attention issues nationwide by empowering parents, young adults, transforming schools, and advocating for equal rights and opportunities. Today, we're excited to share with you the launch of our powerful new report, The State of Learning Disabilities, Understanding the 1 in 5. And we celebrate the introduction of the Respond, Innovate, Succeed, and Empower Act, also affectionately known as the RISE Act, that will be actually introduced today by both the Senate and the Congress. We're live streaming the event today through understood.org on Facebook, and I'd like to welcome parents from around the nation who are joining us. For anyone in the room or online who wants to engage us on social media, we're using the hashtags StateofLD and hashtag RiseAct. And you can find us on Twitter at ncld.org. We're here for one very important reason, because the 1 in 5 children with learning and attention issues deserve every opportunity to succeed in school and in life. 1 in 5. Think about that number. We're talking about millions of students who struggle every day in school due to learning and attention issues. And fortunately, we're surrounded by people today who are making a difference for those children. Here in the room with us and joining us virtually are members of Congress, officials from the U.S. Department of Education, experts in the field, advocates, educators, and parents, all of whom care deeply about how we're helping the 1 in 5, and all of whom are working to help to ensure children thrive in school and in life. I'm excited to share with you today our recent released report, The State of Learning Disabilities, Understanding the 1 in 5, which unpacks the data about how our students are doing and what is happening across the country. This report brings together all the most important data about our kids. It's an incredible tool for advocates, educators, parents, and policymakers. The report was an investment of time, of effort, and of the expertise of more than 30 experts from across the nation, some of whom are here today, and we're very, very grateful to them. To read and explore the report, you can go to ncld.org/stateofld, and importantly, the report is also a reflection of real stories, real lives that have been affected by learning and attention issues. It's about the challenges these individuals face every day, the obstacles that they've overcome, and the success that they're celebrating. And they're here in person today to let us know about their experiences firsthand. I'm honored to be here, and I'm looking forward to sharing the State of LD with you today. And today is about sharing knowledge, learning from experts, and it's about taking steps forward to help the 1 in 5 reach their full potential. Each of us owns a piece of the solution. To make an impact, we need students, parents, and educators to tell their stories. We need advocates to help decision makers find the best solutions. And we need policymakers and their talented staff who are dedicated to these issues. And with that, I'm honored to introduce Senator Hassan. In her short few months in the Senate, Senator Hassan has made it crystal clear that she is a loud voice for those with disabilities, including her own son. As a mother of a son with a disability, like myself, Senator Hassan has seized the potential in every child and recognizes the important role high expectations have on the success of students with disabilities. Senator Hassan, we're truly grateful you're able to join us today. Thank you. Thank you so much. That was so nice.
Thank you to President and CEO Mimi Corcoran and the entire National Center for Learning Disabilities for hosting this event and inviting me to speak with you today. I'd also just like to take a minute to recognize the families, educators, and advocates who are watching online today. The National Center for Learning Disabilities does critical work to empower students and parents and to ensure that all students have equal access to a free and appropriate education, regardless of their personal circumstances. According to data from the NCLD, in the 2013-14 school year, more than 12% of students nationwide and more than 15% of students in my home state of New Hampshire received special education services in our public schools. These students have enormous capacity to achieve and to thrive in our schools, but we know that they need specific support to help them keep advancing. It's critical that we all work together to ensure that all students have the assistance that they need and to ensure that our nation continues to support a strong public education system that works for all students. Access to public education for every student is an issue, as you heard from Mimi, that is very personal to me and my family. It was about 25 years ago that my son, Ben, began his school career. Ben was 3 at the time. Ben happens to experience cerebral palsy, and he is nonverbal, and he can't really use his fingers for a keyboard. He raises his hand to say yes. He isn't ambulatory. But it's fair to say that he notices and understands everything that goes on around him. So 25 years ago, a bus pulled into our driveway, and we were able to wheel Ben on a lift, and off he went to publicly funded preschool, where he was going to have a chance to learn and to make friends. He graduated from Exeter High School. He is a part of his community, and his personality warms, charms, and dominates our household. That experience of going to public school in his hometown, where he was part of the community, has been critical to Ben's development, to his capacity to understand and communicate to the world around him. So I encourage all of the parents and educators listening today to continue fighting for that chance for your child or for yourself, making your voices heard on behalf of your students if you're an educator, because we know that there is much more work we need to do to give our schools, our educators the support they need, and to break down the stigma that many students face. I'm proud to be your partner in the United States Senate, fighting to improve our public education system and to ensure that all students have the opportunity to reach their full potential. I'm going to talk about the RISE Act in just a minute, but I also just want to give an example of how important inclusion is in real terms in our family's experience. Because when I talk about students reaching their potential, I am taken back to a moment in time when Ben was in 5th grade. And his regular education teacher, Ben had a full-time paraprofessional, called me one night and said, you know, Ben is very smart. And I said, well, you know, we've always thought so. Among other things, he always laughed at very sophisticated humor. But I said, how do you know? And she said, because every time one of the other students in class gets the wrong answer, Ben laughs. Now, that told me my son maybe was a little mean, but it also told me that a really talented educator was working to understand the needs of every child in that classroom, even if they had a full-time paraprofessional with them. We have educators all around our country who have that kind of talent and commitment to their kids. We need to be able to support them in that effort. And we need to be able to support educators all the way through the education continuum to work with people who experience disabilities. That's one of the reasons that today I introduced, along with Senators Casey, Cassidy, and Hatch, bipartisan legislation that will support students with disabilities beyond their K through 12 education. As Mimi mentioned, the Respond, Innovate, Succeed, and Empower, or RISE Act of 2017, works to ease the burden of transitioning to college life for students with disabilities and takes an important first step in giving more students the opportunity to participate in higher education. I'll continue to work with members of either party on legislation to support students who experience disabilities and to strengthen public education. We know that when we develop a public school system that works for all students, including those who experience disabilities, it helps educators recognize children who may not have been diagnosed and enables them to follow students through their education and tailor it to their needs. That's the power of an education system that includes every student. I'm going to continue to fight at the federal level for a stronger public education system for all of our students. I know all of you will continue fighting to be champions for your children as well. Our country was founded on the principle that every single person counts. We didn't really count everybody at first, but every generation of Americans has had confidence in the next that we would bring more and more people who had been marginalized for one reason or the next into the heart and soul of our communities, our economy, and our democracy. We know that's really good for the cause of individual freedom and dignity. That's what our country stands for. But the other thing about it is that it unleashes talent and energy that strengthens all of us, and that has been the secret of our country's success. So we need to continue to stand up. We need to continue to support educators who look for the way to communicate and teach all of our children, knowing how much stronger we will be as we continue to work for a more inclusive, nimble, and visionary education system. Thank you so much for including me today. I really appreciate it.
Hello, everyone.
Hi, Congressman. How are you? Let me make just a quick introduction before you.
Sure. Come on up.
There. So we have the great privilege of having Congressman Bouchon and his family, his wife Blair, and his daughter Catherine. Is that
Reverse.
We're reversed. Oh, see, I reversed it. There you go.
Wife Catherine, daughter
Wife
Blair.
Catherine, daughter Blair. He knows firsthand the struggles and successes of children with learning disabilities, not because of his role as a congressman, but because of his role as a dad. And hearing Congressman Bouchon speak about his daughter's struggle with dyslexia and current experiences at Cornell University should make us all realize that when we give our kids the support that they need, that they really are unstoppable and that they thrive like nothing else. Today, I'm proud to announce that Congressman Bouchon and Congresswoman Bonamici are introducing the bipartisan RISE Act legislation that will ease the transition to college for students with learning and attention issues. And we'll learn more about the RISE Act a little bit later, but I'm thrilled to take this opportunity to personally thank you, Congressman, for being with us and for the family to be with us too today. And so, Congressman Bouchon.
Thank you. Well, thank you very much. How many of you have seen me before, like last year? A few. Well, I'm going to tell you a story about a little girl who had trouble reading, and now she's not so little. In first grade, my daughter Blair struggled to read, and we were wondering why. And she had two older brothers who had done well academically, and so we were frustrated a little bit, all of us, about that situation, but and unfortunately the school said, well, maybe she'll learn, give her some time, and we didn't accept that, and so as parents we became advocates for our daughter Blair, and my wife Catherine, who's here today, kind of spearheaded getting our daughter tested. And at that time they didn't determine she actually had dyslexia, but they determined she had a substantial learning disability that was impinging on her ability to learn to read and keep up with her peers. And the reason this is a big problem is because it also affects self-esteem and all the other relationships that you have. It's not just about your academic performance, but it's about overall your ability to be part of the social network of your surroundings, of your class, with your fellow students and with your family and everyone else. And so with some private tutoring and some help from the school, Blair was able to overcome that and read, and then has done well academically. She just finished her freshman year at Cornell and did well. We really never got the diagnosis of dyslexia until she was in high school. As it turns out, I was at a hearing here in Washington, D.C. about dyslexia, and some people from Yale University, the Shaywitzes, Sally Shaywitz was you probably know that name, was testifying, and I went and talked to her and her husband Bennett afterwards. They run the program at Yale, and described kind of Blair's situation, and they said, well, you should have her tested. She's probably dyslexic. And so we had some really complicated testing done, and it turns out that's true. So after many years, we kind of determined exactly what the problem was, even though she had overcome it. So my point is today is it's very important that you're here in Washington as advocates for people with disabilities, including learning disabilities and others, because without advocacy from your standpoint, and in our case, without parental advocacy, I don't think the outcome would have been the same. And the thing I worry about is how many people out there in our country are being, quote unquote, left behind because of the lack of understanding and advocacy, either from their own families or from their school community or their community at large. So it's an honor to be here, and thank you for asking me to come. And we're doing everything we can to be helpful, as you know, with the RISE Act and other things. It's great to be here. Thank you. Thank you. All righty. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Oh, you're welcome.
Yeah. So now I'm going to turn the microphone over to Lindsay Jones, who's our Vice President of Policy and Advocacy here in DC.
Great, thank you so much. We're so excited to have all of you here with us today. We have a few more senators coming in to join us, and we will begin with our panel and begin with the material, but hopefully you'll be okay if we break and allow them to speak due to their schedules whenever they arrive. So it's exciting to have you here. We have an incredible panel. I just want to introduce them quickly to you. You have full bios with you, but let's start in the middle with Ellen. Dr. Braaten is the director of the Learning and Emotional Assessment Program at the Massachusetts General Hospital and a track director of the Child Psychology Training Program at Harvard Medical School. All the way at the end, Dr. David Chard is currently the chair of NCLD's Professional Advisory Board and the president of Wheelock College in Boston. Right next to him is Rachel Vitti, who is a career educator, mother of 4, an advocate for children and others with learning and attention issues. And next, right here, next to Dr. Braaten, is Lena McKnight. You're going to hear directly from her today, and also we'll watch a little bit of her story. Lena has just graduated from City College of New York, which is so exciting, and is here to talk about her struggles with learning and attention issues and her ability, the things that helped her get to the level of success she's reached today. And finally, Savannah Trevino-Casillas, who's here from Arizona. She is currently at the Barrett Honors College, the Arizona State University in Phoenix, the second best university in Arizona, the first being University of Arizona, my alma mater. Go Bear Down Cats, but also an excellent school, ASU. And Savannah was going to talk a little bit about her struggles and triumphs with math disabilities and dyscalculia. So why don't we jump right into something we feature throughout the report, which are personal videos and statements of individuals so that people can hear exactly what some of these issues that people face are. Okay.
For a resource. It wasn't really explained to me like, you have a learning disability or you have an IEP, this is why we're taking you out of the class. But when a teacher would ask me, Lena, read this, or if I seen a word on a paper that I didn't know, I would make some type of big joke or just probably end up being a little rude to the teachers. And then I got suspended a lot. And I can really express that, I don't understand, like I'm acting this way so I can take the pressure off of myself. So it was real tough, but I felt like I did a good job covering it up because no one never knew that I was really hurting. My mom, she didn't graduate from high school, but my dad, he graduated from high school, and they work a lot. And then it didn't help to my parents at all because they wasn't educated on what I was struggling with and what I was being taken out of the class for. To me, I just felt like I was in it alone. I dropped out at 15, 10th grade. Once I got my sophomore schedule, I realized I had no arts on my schedule. And when I went to the school and I asked, it was like, oh, you are far behind. You need to catch up in academics. And I was real frustrated just to do straight academics. For me, it was just I felt like that was going to be overwhelming. So I made the decision that I didn't want to go back to school.
Great. Wonderful. Well, you've lived through the experience of having to watch yourself on video right here. Thank you so much for that. And you may have seen Understood in the corner. Understood is an amazing collaborative of 15 different nonprofit organizations. NCLD is honored to operate and manage Understood on behalf of those. And they're a critical part to bringing these stories to life. So Lena, maybe I'll hand this to you, and you can kick us off. And you know, that we just heard a little bit about your journey, some of the things you struggled with. I wonder if you can talk a little bit more about what it felt like to have to explain your issues to teachers and others, and think through with them and on your own about how you best learned and were able to kind of participate in the classroom.
During my time when I was in high school, I didn't want to ask because I was so embarrassed. I really felt embarrassed because a lot of the friends I were around, they were doing exceptionally well. So for me, I was just too ashamed to ask for help. And it wasn't until I dropped out of high school when I had to go for a GED that I had to ask for help because I knew that I needed to read more. I needed to do math more. But when I got taken out of that whole big 25 classroom setting and got more into a smaller setting, it made it more comfortable for me to ask questions about what I needed help with and be able to express and not be judged.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I wonder, you know, we know that so many students with learning and attention issues and learning disabilities in particular do drop out of school. We have this statistic that they drop out at nearly 3 times the rate of others, despite being as intelligent as their peers. I wonder, what would you say was you mentioned small class size, what was the top thing that maybe helped you get through this and stay in?
Mentorship. Mentorship was a big key in my life because when I felt like I couldn't do it, I had peers and staff around me that forced me and told me I could do it. When I didn't even want to come back to the program, they called and reached out to me and asked why I wasn't coming back to the program. You know, and then they did the sweet little tricks and, you know, we'll take you here, there, and it got me to come, and it actually forced me to understand the work, to not give up, to want to take this test again because I actually had people believing in me. Like, that I say that a lot because when you really have people believing in you, it makes you want to believe in yourself. So it really took that strong mentorship of just that consistency of people not leaving me behind and saying, no, you are going to get this GED, you are going to go to college, and hey, once you do this, we're going to sign you up for CUNY. So it was that push that I had people that actually believe that I can do it that made me feel like I can do it and I want to do it.
That's amazing. Well, congratulations on your recent graduation. It's amazing in many ways because I think, Ellen, maybe you can help us understand kind of learning and attention issues. We often hear that there are these stories of struggle and so many added supports are needed. But can you talk a little bit about what they are, what we know about them?
So that 1 in 5 student that you're talking about, it's hard to make too many generalizations, but one thing that I can say is that when we're talking about these sorts of disabilities, we're really talking about a brain-based issue. These are learning disabilities, attention issues that start in brain processes. And in sort of general terms, one group of kids we could say have what we call specific learning disabilities, meaning a specific impairment in a particular area of learning. Reading, which we've heard about dyslexia, dysgraphia, which is problems in specifically learning to write, either a difficult time getting words on the page or a difficulty with even fine motor skills. There's also dyscalculia, which is problems with math, learning basic math facts or math algorithms. So that's one group of students. Another group of students have attention issues, ADHD, problems with attention, impulsivity, and other students can have issues with regard to motor skill development, language development, problems with nonverbal problem solving. And what we found is a lot of students don't have just one of these issues. Many of them have comorbid issues. For instance, we know that children with ADHD have rates of dyslexia that are much more high than in the general public. So it's a complicated group of students. And let me just, to give you a sense of this brain-based issue, it's a very exciting time to be in the field of learning, in the field of mental health, and even in the field of resiliency, and trying to figure out how kids respond to treatment. You know, we've heard a little bit about dyslexia today, and when a child is learning to read, what it requires is different parts of the brain to be working in tandem with each other. So for instance, in order to be able to read, you have to have an intact visual system, you have to have an intact language system, you have to be able to sort of translate what you're seeing on the page to symbolic representation. So in a normal reader, what happens is those different parts of the brain develop circuitry. They develop basically roads so that those areas of the brain can interact fluently with each other. What we know by looking at the brain itself, and this is something that's been very exciting over the last 10 to 20 years, is we can actually see how the brain processes information in real time. So we know that normal readers are able to develop those pathways pretty easily. If you have dyslexia, you don't necessarily develop those pathways in an efficient manner. And what's exciting, even more exciting than to be able to identify that, is to see that when children get appropriate treatment for dyslexia, that what happens is that actually the brain structure changes itself, and that those pathways that we see in what we would call normal readers actually develop in children with dyslexia given the right kind of treatment and intervention. And I could give you examples of this from ADHD and dyscalculia that we can really see in real time how the brain reacts to different issues like this.
Yeah. You know, it's amazing. I hear, as Mimi mentioned, 1 in 5 students struggle with learning. It's a huge number. And what you've said about the brain and how much we've learned, I'm not sure how much of that has translated to parents and teachers and our views of these children and their abilities. And I wonder if you can just talk about what some of those myths are and your opinion of them.
So one of the easiest myths to dispel is that children with learning and attention issues aren't as bright as children who don't have learning and attention issues, and that there's something about intelligence itself that comes into play here. And we really know that's not true. And that's a pretty easy myth to dispel. I mean, we even heard from the senator this morning that, you know, her teachers knew that, oh, your child is bright. And a lot of times parents know in their heart that their child has the intellectual ability to do tasks. They can't understand why reading or math is so difficult for them. So that's an easy one. The harder myths to dispel are those that involve not trying hard enough, or you're lazy, my child is lazy, or if they would just try harder, they would be able to do this. There isn't a week that goes by that I don't hear that from a teacher or a parent when they say, I just know if he'd just try harder, he'd be able to read better. And I think the example that I like to use to dispel this is, let's say we have 10 children, 9 of whom are great at swimming. They had the right instruction for swimming, they had the right aptitude to learn to swim, but one of those children didn't have one of those things. If we throw all of them into the deep end of the pool, who's trying the hardest to swim? It's not the 9 kids who know how to swim. Swimming is easy for them. They're not even trying at all. But that child who lacked either the instruction or the aptitude to be able to do that on their own, they're trying the hardest of all. Now, the problem is that when you don't have the right kinds of instruction, the right kind of remedial techniques, you're sometimes developing a maladaptive coping style in order to be able to learn to swim. So think about it. If I don't know how to swim and you put me in the deep end, I may look a little bit out of control, but I'm trying the best I can. And so that's a hard myth to dispel, because it feels in the moment that if they just would try harder, but part of it is that there's a lack of understanding about the causes and the treatments for some of these issues.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. And I think, Rachel, it's a great moment to turn to you, a career educator and now a mother of 4. And I know that you as a parent have felt these things and kind of experienced this. And I know your son Lorenzo was, you know, you and your husband had to figure out what was going on. And I wonder if you can talk a little bit about your journey through this as well.
Well, I'm sitting up here nodding my head yes to everything that has been said. Know that I'm here as a representative of the hundreds of thousands of other parents across this country that share the exact same story that I have. I've had the privilege of being even a professional relationship and a mother in 9 different school districts across this country, and 5 that my children have been a part of. So I've seen a lot of this story on repeat over and over again. I think the title of my writing sample was The Long Winding Road to Getting Our Son's Services. We knew going into kindergarten and first grade, things weren't where they needed to be. I saw, as an educator, a bright, intelligent, curious, funny, cute little boy enter school. A year later, he was a completely different child because he was not in the right environment and wasn't provided the right resources and opportunities to thrive. I share that it took till about 6th grade, that was 6 years of his educational career, to get the right resources, to get him in the right environment for him to be successful. That's too long. That's too long. We have the brain research to know what to do. Time is of the essence. We need to act on the knowledge that we have in this country and put our resources into pots that will help our children survive, because it does come down to life and death decisions. We know that these children drop out of school, or our children drop out of school. They have higher rates of suicide. They go down an emotional path that sometimes they never get back from. So if we have the opportunity, we have the information to do better, it's now time for us to actually act on that. We have to be persistent in our pursuit of educational equity for our children. There's no reason why in today's day and age we don't do more.
You know, I also wanted to, you've talked a lot about kind of the stigma that and the fear that goes along with that as a parent, and the concern and the worry. And I wonder, you know, we know these myths persist. We have the slide showing us in our own research that 78% of parents were worried. I wonder if you can talk a little bit about how did you feel as a parent about the possibility of there being a label on your child, or this idea of that we were going to talk about Lorenzo and his talents and his gifts and everything, but all a little bit differently, a little more.
Well, as an educator, I mean, you see the statistics, you know what happens to a child that's labeled, right? The scary thought is that they end up in a room somewhere and they get left behind. And then as a reality of being a woman of color and having a child that's a little brown boy in a classroom, that the double stigma exists. And so we were hesitant at first to raise our hand to say, we could be going down a learning disability path because we didn't want that double stigma. We know historically in the context of race, in the context of socioeconomic status, that our children don't start at the same starting line as everyone else. So we were hesitant to acknowledge that, okay, we're going to need more resources because we knew how hard the fight would be to get those resources. And again, it was very hard. We're still not there, but that's what empowers me to advocate more for other parents that would not have the resources that we have. We were very lucky. My husband is a professional, I'm a professional. Not everybody has those same resources. And so that's why I continue to fight for parents that don't know that you know, getting homework done is a struggle because there's an unidentified learning issue. You know, getting a C on a test when you know they knew the science experiments and can articulate in the classroom, well, I know everything about world history, but when it comes down to the test, they fail the test, there's a disconnect. And anytime that disconnect is there, 9 out of 10 times, there's a learning issue going on. And so we need to raise awareness to make sure that parents, educators, school administrators, policy advisors, the Senate, you guys all are aware that this is an issue that needs to be identified and taken care of immediately because children's lives are at stake.
And I actually have one more question for you along the lines, because Lorenzo, through the evaluation process, I know Lorenzo was identified as something that we refer to as twice exceptional, having gifts and talents and learning disabilities. Can you talk a little bit about, not a lot of people are identified with that, and maybe because of stigma.
And that was part of the problem. In this twice exceptionality world, his gifts and talents and intelligence masked the learning disability that he had, but then the learning disability masked how intelligent he was. So it wasn't until we had the psychoeducational evaluation that, again, we had to fight to get. That was not an immediate, oh, he's struggling, let's do an evaluation. No, it was parents at home saying, there is something going on with this child. And as a mother, you go back to the emotional turmoil that happens in a home, family disruption when things aren't okay during that 3 to 5 o'clock hour when homework's happening, to fight to get that evaluation. The evaluation gave us a tremendous amount of information. We're able to take that and then go back to the school system and say, how can we work together to make sure this child is successful? Again, it took 6 years, but we were able to do it. And so it shouldn't take that long. But the gifts and talents, once you recognize that the children are getting the appropriate supports, they can go on and do wonderful things. I mean, they can use their problem-solving skills, their intellectual capacity, their high levels of emotional intelligence to be the great people in the community that they are.
Yeah, and I thank you so much for sharing that story. We've worked together for a long time, and it's still, every time I hear it, I think it's just so important, and it's so common in many ways too, that we need to be really focused on getting out this information. I just look at this statistic of only 1.5% of students in advanced placement AP courses have IEPs, individual education plans, so they're getting services for disabilities under our nation's education law, the Individuals with Disabilities and Education Act. And the only reason we even have this data is because of the Department of Education's civil rights data collection. And until we had that statistic added into that collection, we, from my perspective in the policy world, had a really hard time taking the anecdotes we hear from parents about Twice Exceptional and the research in the field and making a great case for why each and every one of our schools should be changing the way they view students with disabilities and the broad exceptionalities that they have.
I just wanted to add, it's access and opportunities to not only the general ed curriculum, but the access and opportunity to that higher level critical thinking opportunity, right? We know that the gifted and talents within them can be exposed once they have access to that. So it's just as important.
Absolutely, no, it's a great point. And we'll go actually next to David. And I wonder, oh, excuse me. So we are so excited that Senator Murphy, it appears, has joined us. So please forgive me, David, as we interrupt you, and we'll come right back to the panel at the end of this. And apparently he's, and I want to start with David. Would you like, yeah.
Sure, I'll do that. Do the honors. Senator Murphy, thank you for being here. For most of you here, you know that Senator Murphy is truly a strong voice and advocate for students with disabilities as a member of the Senate Health, Education, Labor, Pensions Committee. And his leadership on behalf of students, families, and educators has brought their voices, stories, and issues to the national spotlight. Senator Murphy is truly an ally for us and a friend to our students and parents and the communities, and certainly to us at the National Center for Learning Disabilities. So I'm honored to introduce Senator Murphy.
Thank you very much for having me, and I'm so sorry to interrupt this great panel, but our schedules are very tight in the Senate. I'm straight down from a hearing with Secretary DeVos and heading off to a Democratic caucus meeting now, but I really want to be here to just support all of the work that you do, to support all of the parents, to support all the professionals, to support all of the students that have really made the center a leader for years and years. And we need you in this fight right now. This is a critical moment to understand what the future role of the federal government is going to be in protecting students with disabilities and empowering students with disabilities. And there are some really big open questions right now that exist, questions that frankly did not get answered over the course of the day when Secretary DeVos stood before us. I fought side by side with the center to make sure that there was a section of the new elementary and secondary education law that required schools and states to track students with disabilities and to make sure that if they aren't hitting performance targets, that the schools have evidence-based plans to turn around the experience of those students. The Obama administration put out some regulations at the end of last year to give states guidance, give school districts guidance on how they come up with those plans, how they assess performance. Unfortunately, Republicans in Congress at the beginning of this year passed a law repealing that guidance, repealing those regulations. And so now it's the sole jurisdiction of the Secretary of Education to make these determinations about whether states' protections for students with disabilities or for any student population complies with the federal law. And so I literally just got finished asking the Secretary of Education about 6 different times whether there was any plan that a state could put forward that explains what the interventions will be for student populations that are not performing, and students with disabilities would be amongst those, that would be insufficient. Would she reject any plan? I gave her an example. I said, what if the school district said that if students with disabilities weren't meeting performance targets, they would change the color of the walls? So I said, what if that was their turnaround plan? Would you approve that? She effectively said yes. So she said there was no plan that she could imagine that would be inefficient, that would be insufficient, and that she could not commit to any level of standard or protections for students. Now, that's not what the law says. The law says that you have to have evidence-based interventions to help students who are underperforming. And so she'd be in violation of the law if she approved every single plan, even if they proposed painting the walls. So she, today in her hearing, said that she was going to violate the law when it came to protecting students with disabilities. I think when her lawyers get a hold of her later today, they will tell her that she can't do that. But it just underscores how important all of you are. It underscores how important it is for parents and for students and professionals in every state across this country to be going to your congressman, to be going to your state legislator, regardless of party, regardless of ideology, and telling them that they have to stand up, not just for students, but for the law, that they have to demand that the law be followed, and that if students with disability are not getting a fair shot at educational success, then states need to give them something better, something different. That's what the law commands. And if we don't, the disparities that exist today, it's not that they won't go away, they'll get worse, right? I mean, I spend a lot of time thinking about school discipline, right? And you all know the stats, right? Students with disabilities are twice as likely to get out-of-school suspensions and expulsions than students without disabilities. In-school arrests, well, 25% of the kids that are arrested have disabilities, but those same students are only 12% of the population. So if we don't enforce this law, then these numbers are going to get worse, not better. And what gives me confidence is not the statements today from the Secretary of Education, but the fact that you all can hold her and hold this Congress accountable. And I know that you're doing a lot of work here today to talk about that mission. It's more important now than ever. So appreciate the chance to come by. I'll return your attention to the panel and look forward to working with you. Thank you. Thank you, guys.
All right. So we were just, and I do want to remind everyone, we believe Senator Casey may come at some point as well and alter our schedule a bit. But I do want to mention, or really what I would like to just speak about with you, David, is a little bit about over the last, 15 to 20 years, we've seen so many more students with disabilities be moved out of what we call segregated settings where they're alone, into inclusion classrooms, general education settings. In fact, 70% of students with learning disabilities spend 80% or more of their day in general education classrooms. Certainly something that we've worked for and to be celebrated. But now that means a lot of general education teachers who haven't necessarily been trained or getting the development they need around how to work with this diverse student population are doing it. And with your long career in teacher education and research in that area, can you just talk a little bit about what do you think are some of the key strategies and ways forward for us to really address this shift?
So let me start by saying being a general education teacher is a really difficult job, right? So I think it's important to acknowledge that teachers, even well-trained teachers, struggle with 25 or 30 children in the classroom to meet the needs of everyone. So that's important to acknowledge. I think secondly, we face a lot of the challenges that folks have already talked about, that acknowledging that disabilities exist, particularly the learning and attention issues we're discussing today. For decades, we've struggled to convince people that these are more than laziness. They're more than a lack of motivation. And now the science has caught up in some cases that allow us to be much more specific about the needs of children. And what's lagging now is the preparation of teachers in many cases to acknowledge that science and to get it into preparation programs. And then for the force of teachers who are in service in classrooms where children with learning and attention issues are spending every day. Oftentimes those teachers came from preparation programs that were inadequate and or they haven't had adequate professional development to give them the knowledge that you've heard mentioned today. So we have some catch up to do. The exciting thing is, and I want to make sure people understand this, is that we've invested over decades in understanding some of the strategies that Ellen mentioned around teaching reading, around behavior change, around positive behavioral supports, around multi-tiered services of supports. The Office of Special Education Programs has studied these. IES in the Department of Education has worked to sort of build a knowledge base around these strategies that tell us why they're effective and why general education teachers need to be effectively trained to use them. We still struggle to get them implemented in teacher education programs and or professional development. And I don't want to put the blame at any one juncture. I think we've got to launch teachers' careers, but then we have to be supportive of helping them learn as they go to be increasingly knowledgeable of things like universal design for learning and why it is that some students may show their brilliance if they have an opportunity to demonstrate it differently than just on a standardized assessment. So these are things that I think teachers, particularly new teachers, will struggle with unless they're given sort of adequate support to implement them in the classroom.
Yeah, no, it's such a complicated area, and yet there's so much research-based evidence, as you mentioned, multi-tiered supports, universal design for learning, lots of great things that we do know work thanks to the research out of the Office of Special Education Programs and other Institute of Education Sciences to lean on. Switching a little bit, maybe to the other part of the classroom, in a sense, the whole child. There's been so much interest in social emotional learning. I think we heard from Lena earlier. One of the most important things, the mentoring program, the attention to her as a whole person, and we've seen that throughout education. And I think students with learning and attention issues, what a lot of the evidence shows us is that because of these issues with stigma, they are facing some of in need of some of those supports even more. And so I wonder if you could just talk a little bit about what schools are doing, promising practices. I know that's a beginning area, but
sure. I think actually it's not really beginning, but you do have to understand the context of it. For decades, we treated behavior as something you would expect children to do. Right? You expect them to behave in the classroom. And if they didn't, we disciplined them or sent them home. And children with learning and attention issues, of course, are more vulnerable because of the experiences Lena articulated of her own experience. But I think what we did was we would suspend, either in-school suspension or out-of-school suspension, effectively cutting off any opportunity to teach what we are expecting them to be able to do. And I think that's the piece particularly that we have to think about. How do we tailor our expectations in a way that involve instruction? How do you teach the behaviors you're expecting for children who may not see them? They may not be obvious to them what they're expected, and in fact, they may use them. I think Lena said, she sort of was rude to teachers. It was a way of sort of saying, don't bother me, right? Because I'm embarrassed or whatever it happens to be. And I think teachers immediately see that as a defiance, a won't rather than a can't issue. And it's because they don't know how to either access the learning and therefore make the environment effective for them, or they're using their behavior as an attempt to get away from whatever it is that is embarrassing or disconcerting for them.
Right. And just to build on that, I know that we've talked a lot about mental health supports and other types of things. The report focuses a little bit on that. Not exactly this area, but somewhat related. Can you speak to that a little bit too? The place of that in our schools, is it on the you've had a longer, are schools facing that more now than they were? And are we in need of help in that area?
Absolutely. And what we know is that with cumulative bad experiences in school and the power that teaching that doesn't understand the needs of learning and attention issues can actually result in mental health problems as people grow older. We are actually creating programs that address infant mental health and toddler mental health. I mean, really trying to help people understand how positive experiences versus negative experiences accumulate over time, right? And that if you put children every day into an environment where they're not successful, what does that tell them about themselves? And then ultimately, how they might conduct themselves as they grow older. And absolutely, mental health is a huge issue for us to be concerned about.
Yeah, it's important because I think one of the things that we try to feature in the report is this downward spiral that can happen not based on the way the brain is structured or what that is, but because of the reaction to these consistent negative experiences and the frustration. So thank you for that. I think that we have Senator Casey here. I'm hoping that's true. Oh, no, he's maybe. Oh, Senator, I will just say that we're hopeful that Senator Casey will join us here in a minute. But I think, one of the things that Lena's story and that others, we feature lots of personal stories in the report that are videos and otherwise to try to show how we can intervene much earlier to make some changes. Oh, wonderful. Well, I have the great pleasure to introduce Senator Casey from the great state of Pennsylvania, who we are so excited to partner with in many different ways. And Senator, we just want to say thank you to you and to your other members of the Senate for introducing the RISE Act today, which we've talked a lot about, so I won't go into it, but you're a great leader on that, and we really appreciate it. So thank you for
Thanks
joining
so much.
us.
Thanks for having us. Well, Lindsay, thank you so much for that and for gathering here. I want to know who got the cookies and the soda. Is there anything else there? You have lunch there. That's good. And am I standing between you and lunch? Are you sure? No. No, that's a dangerous position to be in. But thanks for gathering here, and thanks for your advocacy around the country and certainly here in Washington today. We're grateful. I think that if there is, despite all of the rancor and discord and partisanship in Washington, there are once in a while some issues that present themselves or come before us where you have some bipartisanship. The RISE Act, of course, is one of those. And I think that maybe the reason for that is that these kinds of challenges that families face, families with a loved one who has a disability but who wants to also get the benefit of higher education, the obstacles are there no matter whether they're Democrat or Republican. So I'm happy that we have, for introduction today, 2 Democrats, 2 Republicans. I'm one of the Democrats. Senator Hassan is the other Democrat. Senator Hatch, with whom I've worked before, and Senator Cassidy. So that's a good start, especially in this environment. And we're particularly happy about that. And we will need, even bills, as you know, that have that kind of consensus. That kind of agreement doesn't necessarily ensure passage, nor does it ensure momentum in furtherance of the goal of passage. So we have to always assume that there will be legislative or other obstacles to overcome. And with that dramatic pause, wow, interesting. Yeah. I thought there might be like a birthday cake coming out. Sorry, my birthday was in April, thank you. Thanks for thinking of us. No, but so we're just going to have to continue the fight to keep it moving forward. I do think the fact that it has 2 Democrats, 2 Republicans should help, and I'm grateful for that. I know that I know that that isn't the only issue in front of you, but that's a significant issue in and of itself. And I can't imagine. I mean, I went to college a long time ago, and it was overwhelming in some respects then, back in the 1970s. I think it's ever more so today. I have 4 daughters. Our youngest of 4 is in college, the only one in college now. And I just can't imagine how complicated it is for any young person approaching all of the difficulties of seeking higher education. But today, or I think today in the context of someone who has both an interest in higher education and a disability, can only be daunting. We're told that even with all the progress made by virtue of IDEA and other advancements, even though college or high school education graduation rates are higher, we know that it hasn't translated to college completion rates. We're told that, and these numbers might be old news to you, but 40% of students with disabilities complete post-secondary programs, compared with 52% of students without disabilities, and all of the hurdles you have to overcome with regard to documentation and reasonable accommodations and all of those issues. So there is need for this legislation. There is bipartisan agreement. Now we just have to figure out a pathway to get it through the Senate and the House and get it passed into law. And our House colleagues are helping as well, as you know. I guess the last thing I'd say, and this is not I wouldn't call it ancillary, but it may not be the focus of your work today, is this larger debate about Medicaid and healthcare generally, but maybe in particular Medicaid. Without veering off from all of the topics that you're here to engage about today, I hope you can find in your own personal work and your own personal advocacy some time to put on the table with folks around here the current concerns we have about Medicaid. I'll use my words. You don't have to adopt my language, but I think what has been proposed in the first House bill that was not voted on, the second bill that was voted on, and that's the operative bill right now until they come up with something different. We're awaiting those 13 Republicans to come out of that room, literally or figuratively, with a new proposal. But I hope that they would not embrace in any way the Medicaid proposal, which would decimate Medicaid, which is really bad for Americans with disabilities. By one estimate in Pennsylvania, more than 722,000 Pennsylvanians with a disability are dependent upon Medicaid. 1.1 million kids and 250,000 seniors. And frankly, a lot of other people who may not be a child or someone with a disability or a senior, but they might have a job at a local hospital, and their job is going to be on the line in a lot of communities, especially in rural areas. And I think this urgency, or the information that we're trying to get out, is just beginning to land. I think there are a lot of people that don't know much about Medicaid and don't think about it very often, but it's our job to get that word out. So I just hope that you can be advocates for the right course of action on Medicaid. I'm being very careful here. I was just at a rally, so I want to be very careful what I say. But I'm grateful for your leadership and for the effort you bring to bear when you come here. I think some people believe when you come to Washington and advocate on an issue that people here just see you and you pass on, and it's just kind of routine business. You should never underestimate the impact that your voices bring to this town. On most issues that are of concern to members of the United States Senate, your voice will be more persuasive than mine. That's not just a nice thought, it actually is true, because it makes sense. Why would someone in the other party place too much reliance upon or too much confidence in assertions or arguments by someone in the other party? Sometimes you have a relationship where they actually will be more likely to listen. But when they get information from you, if you're a constituent, or because you have a degree of credibility in learning and immersion in an issue, they tend to listen more carefully. So I guess I'm putting pressure on you to say you'll be more persuasive. So keep persuading as best you can on the RISE Act and on so many other issues that confront Americans across the country that have a disability. So we're grateful for that, and I think if we can achieve success on this, we're going to have folks who will have a much easier time with higher education, albeit a difficult task in and of itself. So, Lindsay, thank you for this time. And I won't stay for the cookies. Thanks. Thank you so much for your time. Appreciate it.
It's just amazing to be able to have such bipartisan consensus on this issue. And I think it speaks beyond just the RISE Act. We're talking today about that. But we really do see, as you think again back to the statistic that Mimi mentioned, 1 in 5 individuals struggles with learning and attention issues. And that's why it's it's not an easy bipartisan issue. But we see people from all walks of life ready to stand up and do things like we have in both the House and the Senate, the bipartisan focus on the RISE Act. We've mentioned it throughout the day. As you know, we're excited to have it introduced today, and it is meant to ease the transition from high school to college, and it fixes one very small thing. It does a whole bunch of things, but something you wouldn't think was a problem. It would allow someone who has a record of a disability, who has an individual education plan or a plan under Section 504, so they've met a standard of disability in a different federal law. It would allow them to go into a college, a university, and not have to prove again that they still have a disability. We heard Dr. Braaten did a great job talking about how these are issues that are brain-based. They don't go away over time. If you have a disability, you will struggle with it for your life. You will overcome and triumph. We've heard a lot of stories of success. But right now, what the RISE Act aims to do is ease that transition to higher education. And I think, the one other thing about it that's amazing is we're actually having this conversation about let's help all of our students go on to higher education. For those of you in the room who are very active in 94-142, the original IDEA, that is a great conversation to be having, and we have come quite a long way, even though we still struggle with a lot of things that we're here to talk about and that the report really focuses on. And so I want to actually transition it to our last panelist before we open it to some questions. And Savannah, you are in college at ASU. You are in Barrett Honors College. You are someone who has struggled with math disabilities, with dyscalculia, and in many ways overcome them. You're on this journey through college. Can you tell us a little bit about, in your experience, what was important to you that helped you, and what's helping you now that you're in college?
Sure. Yes. So I will be starting my junior year in the fall, and I'm a semester ahead. But the thing that's really helped me on my journey are all my advocates. My grandma has been a huge advocate, and my private tutors. They really helped me in one specific situation, which was last summer. I had to take 2 math classes, college algebra and trigonometry, concurrently in order to be on track for my major, which is psychology. And I chose to take those 2 classes at a local community college, but my trigonometry professor refused to give me my accommodations, so I didn't get extra time on tests, and I wasn't able to take any tests or do any work outside of the classroom. And it was just a continuous issue the entire summer term. He kept refusing. He called me a liar, and it was just a really difficult situation. And it wasn't until the end of the summer term where my grandma and my tutors and we tried to work with the disability services at that campus. We ended up going to the dean of students, and we made a formal complaint, and finally the professor ended up having to take a Disability 101 course so he could kind of learn about disabilities. So I really hope that ended up working for him, and I really hope so. I wanted to ensure that any other students wouldn't have to go through what I went through, just because it was so difficult and I had never experienced anything like that. All my professors up until then had been really understanding, and now at ASU, all my professors are really open to me teaching them about dyscalculia, and they always love it when I give them a little help sheet that I typed up about facts and information about dyscalculia, and they're just really open to having a really good conversation with me and just to understand where I'm coming from and how my disability affects me. And it's been a challenge, but so far, overall, it's been good.
What an amazing story of self-advocacy. I mean, you're making a tip sheet and handing it. It's a great example of self-advocacy and the incredible support you have around you and your grandma and others. So I want to ask you kind of what would be your biggest piece of advice to young adults out there looking at going to college, worried maybe about it, about the extra load, about these types of interactions? What would you say to them?
I would tell them to not be ashamed about their learning difference or anything that they struggle with. I know a lot of people don't really want to get the help and the extra support, or they don't know that it's still there when they're going to college. They think it might end in high school, but you still get those accommodations and you still get that extra support. And I would just tell them to seek out extra help and to seek out friends and family members and professors who are willing to listen to you and to understand you. And to just keep going. And you just have to be really strong and resilient. I mean, that's part of having a learning difference. I think that makes you really strong and resilient.
Absolutely. That's terrific advice. Thank you. And on that, I think we'll open it to any questions from the audience. Oh, of which there are some. Great. Okay, the first one comes in for Ellen. How can the education and healthcare communities work together to help kids with learning disabilities, learning and attention issues, and their families?
Oh boy, that's a great question. I think I'd love to know what they mean when they're talking about healthcare facilities, but I think that part of what we're talking about today is knowledge being the thing that drives destigmatization, which drives people to get treatment. If we're not ashamed of what disability or learning difference we have, we're going to be much more apt to get the appropriate treatment. So I think I work in a medical setting, and I also work very closely with schools, and I think medical settings and the research coming out of medical centers, I mean, the representative was talking about Yale, for example, which has been a powerhouse for helping us understand dyslexia. So I think there are ways of bridging what we're learning at academic medical settings, for example, as well as bridging or giving knowledge to pediatricians, which are sometimes on the very front lines of diagnosing or identifying an attention issue, developmental issue, or motor issue, language issue. So I think it's really, I guess the answer is more coordination between all these different sorts of entities, and then and to do that, it's just providing knowledge to all of them and sharing, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. So fascinating. I think trying to get those two fields to work more closely together.
It's hard, but it's absolutely necessary.
Because you think, where does a parent first go to? Oftentimes that's their pediatrician or a medical doctor in some way.
Yes.
Absolutely.
And so knowledge for pediatricians, those frontline sort of physicians, as well as teachers, I really think those are the people who really have the most power to affect change.
Yeah. And, speaking of that, it just kind of it's no shock. Several questions have come in about general education teachers. And David, I wonder if you could elaborate a little bit more. We've had, I think there are, because of that statistic that we talked about, so many of our children are in general education classrooms. Are there ways that you would recommend parents work with teachers, that parents can collaborate, can bring some of this information to their schools? What would you say about that?
Well, I probably don't need to tell anyone in the room or on online that oftentimes the relationship between parents and teachers is not a good one. It's an antagonistic one, which almost never, I have to be careful because sometimes it does result in good outcomes, but almost never results in the most optimal service to children. And so I think, by design, IEPs were supposed to be created in a collaborative environment between parents and teachers. Parents spend more time with their children than teachers do. Teachers should have more specific knowledge of the needs educationally of the children, and together the idea is that you create a plan moving forward to support the child in that environment. We've oftentimes had a hard time convincing general ed teachers to be involved in IEP development. And if they're not involved in the development of the IEP, then they don't understand its purpose and the goals and how to achieve those goals. We also find from time to time that the general ed teacher doesn't know what's happening to the student outside of the school setting. And so they've not been able to hear the kinds of experiences the parent observes. So I think in kind of improving the collaborative atmosphere between parents and teachers would certainly be a big step forward. And where that happens, in school districts where that can be exemplified, I think we see much more progress for children.
That's great. Thank you. And I wonder, Rachel, if you could kind of take that as well. And in the question that I just asked to Savannah, I think, what would you say as a successful parent advocate as well, who has navigated this journey from all sides, what would be your sort of one piece of advice to parents out there who are facing?
Definitely just be relentless in your pursuit of equity for your child. You know your child best, and I think to be the best advocate, it takes part of the child influencing what's going on, but you have that intuitive, instinctual feeling that something isn't going well, and you have to use your voice. Sometimes it's uncomfortable. Sometimes it puts knots in your own stomach, but in the end, it's for the best. And so, but find a village that will support you through that as well, because you can't do it by yourself. You have to definitely find a group of parents that have either gone through it before or are currently going through it to help support you, and those that have kind of survived to the other side to help you navigate the system, because that's important. Because parents have emotional turmoil just as much as the children do when you're going through the thick of it. So find a support group and believe in your child, right? Just because you don't necessarily see, a wheelchair or a child's not visually impaired, that they don't have hurdles to overcome, they do. But just believe that they can get there with the right supports and services.
Yeah, and maybe we'll wrap up with Lena, actually. And Lena, I wonder, you talked about that village and how it helped you. Can you let us know a little bit about I know you are a mentor now, and you've worked with lots of students with learning and attention issues and shared your story. What strikes you about that, and what is the advice that you offer to them?
Don't give up. Ask questions. This is your education. I always make it clear when Harlem Children's Zone did give me that opportunity, it helped me educate myself on knowing what was an IEP, because I didn't even know what it was when I was in school until I started working for an organization that forced me to learn about it, because I was going to work with kids on it. And when I learned about it, I explained to them the advantages that they have. You have all of these advantages. This is your education. Can't no one take it for you. And I had to have these mentors that put that idea in my head, that now makes me tell other students, like, hey, listen, this is your education. They cannot fail you. You are responsible for going up there to talk to these teachers. Even if you can't, let me know. I will do it for you. Or we can speak to your parents and we can make this work somehow. But failing is not an option. That's why I make sure I work with kids in 10th grade, because I feel like after the 9th grade, where you go through trying to get your friends and learn who you are at 10th grade, and when you really got to narrow down on these grades and get these classes, and then you notice that you're falling behind, it's like, what about me? You need to have people around you that can push you. So make sure you surround yourselves with friends that are trying to push you. Even if you don't know it, make sure you ask your questions, because the IEP is there and designed to help you.
Yeah, I think that's a terrific piece of advice to end this on. I want to say we hope that the report, State of Learning Disabilities, that if you can get on our website, ncld.org, will help you as you advocate for yourself, for others, for your children, make the case about the evidence and what's needed. Please join me in thanking our panel, and thank you.